Shamu, everyone. It's been a couple days. I'm not gonna lie, the Kenneth Grant trying to even talk about that took a lot out of me and where we're going. It's been a lot. Plus, I had to take some days off for the feast day of St. Cyprian, but we are back at it. Part 21 now of deconstructing the history of the left-hand path. Now, when we started this, we discussed Blavatsky, and Blavatsky misunderstanding Vamachara, and the Bhakti, and all of this. We talked about Crowley and Fortune writing about the idea of a left-hand path of black brothers, of left-hand occultists being evil, being failed, failing to cross the abyss, the idea of the black brother, these being selfish, craven people. Sorry, weird sounds outside. I don't know what that is. Sounds like an alien out there. They're coming to get me. I talked about Grant, they're coming to get me. We talked about Arthur Avalon trying to pull the left hand of the goddess back into the discussion. All of that, I want you to forget all of that now. None of that matters. It's all gone. Nope. Doesn't matter because it is 1989. It's 1989. Dragon Rouge is formed by Thomas Carlson. And that's where we're at. That's our next big stop. Now, what is the Dragon Rouge? The Dragon Rouge is an order that was founded out in Sweden. I am going to say to its credit, part of its founding there were incorrect rumors, and that attempted to equate Dragon Rouge with MLO, or the Misanthropic Luciferian Order, which is it's a bad thing. The Dragon Rouge is not that. I will give it its credit. Give it its credit where it's due. It's not that. But what is the Dragon Rouge, and who is Thomas Carlson? So the Dragon Rouge is a left-hand path occult group, and it defines itself as an international, all across the world, international left-hand path order that is working in a draconian tradition. You see where we're going here? Before we get into this, if you go to the official... This is something very important. Follow me here. On the official site of Dragon Rouge, they list the draconic path as ahistorical, archetypal, and eternal. Ahistorical. Dragon Rouge itself comes out and says there is no history to bear out what we're saying. We are pulling this out of not history. There's no credence, no anything. So that's already like a thing going on. But what they do is they have an initiatory order, and it's structured around what they call the 11 degrees of the Qliphoth. Now, I talked briefly about the Qliphoth in the Grant video. I do have a longer video breaking down the entirety of the Qliphoth and why none of this Qliphoth stuff actually works or makes any sense. That's somewhere on the channel. I gotta figure out how to title it. So in that same vein, they frame the left-hand path similar to what Grant and Evola frame it as this antinomian current. And what's the goal of it? Our favorite word, apotheosis. It is an apotheotic path. It is the opposite of mystical union. So that idea, way back when we started talking about apotheosis, we've come full. It's developed, it's burst out fully. The Dragon Rouge, part of the repertoire it lists are things such as black masses, that's where this really comes in, Qliphotic invocations, which again, just look at my Qliphoth video about that, what they claim is traditional ritual magic, hex sabbats, which we'll get into it. And Goetic magic, which notably is not Goetic. The whole Ars Goetia versus Goetia, that's a whole other. I'm going to do a video on this at some point. But, so it's ahistoric, and it relies on stuff that doesn't really exist. Some of the pillars that it draws from, that Dragon Rouge draws their inspiration and their framework for. They list Qliphothic Kabbalah, which just doesn't exist, as we've discussed. They list Tantrism, so tantric practices. However, we are now in the 1980s, and the West fetishization of anything Oriental is in full swing. So it is an Anglophonic view of Tantra, not an actual view. It is not what Arthur Avalon tried to talk about, and is in fact what he warned about. They also list alchemy as something that they draw inspiration from, in order to tie it into that apotheosis, so a little rhetorical flourish with the idea of the magnum opus. And then they also list the dark side of the Nordic tradition. Now, there's a couple people here on TikTok that I follow that are big on their Nordic stuff, and they've spoken about this whole thing, and they could probably tell you better. We're going to talk about it, but I'm not sure what we're going to, I'm not sure what there is for me to tell you about Dragon Rouge. Their Qliphothic stuff is just non-existent. Their Tantra is not, it's a Western view. Their alchemy has been subjugated for apotheosis instead of Unio Mystica, instead of Eros Gamos. There's none of that. They straight up say this is all archetypes. We're not working with anything real. We're working with an overarching archetype. The damage Jung has done is here. But at the forefront of all of this is Thomas Carlson, who writes Kabbalah, Qliphoth, and Goetic Magic, which is the program text for Dragon Rouge. It's fundamental to what is occurring in Dragon Rouge. Kenneth Granholm lists this, and in his Dark Enlightenment and Aries Journals talks about how important that book is. Dragon Rouge is very hard to discuss because they were very obscure and abstract with the stuff they were doing, almost intentionally. But they pull a lot on listed influences is Kenneth Grant. He's a recommended material reading source for the Dragon Rouge, along with Castaneda, which has its own issue. I'm sure by now everyone's aware of the Castaneda issue. There's also ties to Evola and his accelerationism and everything we talked about with Evola, and they mix all of this together in this weird mishmash draconic thing. Again, it's draconic because Grant said there was a worldwide Set cult, and Set was a dragon, though Set wasn't a dragon, though he is in Universe B, where Lovecraft gods were. I'm not sure what to tell y'all here. We're at a part where things are so murky and tied, the funnel is full of sludge. I've barely said anything here, and we've hit the 10-minute mark. So we'll be back. We'll talk a little bit about Thomas Carlson and a little bit more about Dragon Rouge, and we'll talk about how this impacted the left-hand path. We will return.